There we go.
Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Kerry Ford calling in from Ojai, California. I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to the, I think, 6th question and answer broadcast with John McIntosh. I'm very happy to be your co-host today. And John is going to touch on personal development again today, so we could consider this personal development broadcast number 2, because he did touch on that topic last week. If you want to catch up with some of the replays of the previous broadcasts, all you need to do is go to John's YouTube channel, which is, I don't think that's it. I think it's Love Lines WG.
This is the new way.
There's a new way.
It's a website, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't get the memo on that. Sorry about that. So go to this link here, and you can find all the previous broadcasts that we've done over the past few weeks. We're going to try to keep this broadcast at 55 minutes. As we go along, if you're on live, please put your comments or your questions in the comments section to the right of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. We're going to try to keep this at 55 minutes long. And if you have questions and you're watching a replay, please email John, and you can email him at this address here, globalpeaceweb@gmail.com. And we will invite you to come on the broadcast live with us to ask your question if your question is selected, or I will read your question for you. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, as I said, my name is Kerry Ford, and I've had my own particular insights about the shift, which is the time that we're in now, between paradigms, you could say. And I've posted those insights on my website, voiceofdivinefeminine.com. So you can certainly connect with me there and check that out if you're so inclined. So I want to read just a brief bio of John McIntosh. Some of you have heard this over and over. You probably have it memorized by now, but for those that may be new to John's work, John McIntosh was a successful entrepreneur until 1999. He traveled for decades around the world, speaking to tens of thousands of people about personal development before leaving everything behind and diving into self-discovery inquiry. John shares his acquired understanding of the false self-identity together with his personal experience of thinking with the heart, which returns you to full conscious awareness of who you really are, through his 27 books and his daily blog articles. So you can check out some of those books anyway at the link that he just popped up. So I'm really delighted to be here with John. I'm going to bring him on right now, and he's going to say a few words before we get into the questions. Hi, John.
Thanks very much, Anne. I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, welcome to broadcast number 6. I just want to, as Anne suggested, touch a little bit more on the self-development concept that is extremely popular, has been for 50, 60, 70 years, I think certainly since the 40s or 50s, last 100 years. And I have mentioned that the concept of self-development is not really a possibility, because the self, which is another word for God or one or consciousness or I am, is already perfect. You can't improve on what's already perfect. And this is who you really are. And then the false self, which some people call the ego, I never use that because there's so many interpretations, but the false self identity, body, mind, false self identity, which is what we call me or a person, also can't be improved because it's not real. All evidence to the contrary. So what's the point? Well, there is a point and there is a value. In the so-called history of humanity, which arguably is millions of years old, but whatever period of time you want to accept, time also is not real. There has been a suppression, certainly in the patriarchy in the last 11,000 years. There's been a suppression of consciousness by the energy of the patriarchy and by visibly a handful of so-called people on the planet at any given time. And this has created a hierarchy of those that know and those that don't know, those that have abilities and those that don't have abilities. And this persists even to this moment. You certainly see the conflict of it unraveling right now as the patriarchy house of cards collapses very, very quickly, and we have controversy and chaos all over the place, which is what happens at the end of every phase. And it's temporary, but it's also very poignant while it's happening, and we're right in the midst of it right now. So the value of the concept of self-empowerment or self-improvement is that the consciousness, while it's still sleeping, and I call this the slumbering God self, while it's still sleeping, tends to begin to believe that perhaps it's more worthy than it thought it was. And we're talking over hundreds of years of feeling unworthy, and then a very short period, a very short burst of 60 or 70 years now of feeling like, gee, I can do this. I can achieve anything. Whatever the mind conceives and believes it can achieve was what Napoleon Hill said. These kinds of ideologies have touched now hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people around the world for this 50, 60, 70 years. This is a very, very good segue for what most would believe is the evolution of humanity. Well, there's no such thing as evolution. The self is never changing, and you're always the self. But there is a belief that you're not the self. There's a belief that you are a human, and so therefore there is the belief that there is an evolution. And whatever you believe, of course, is going to appear in your life. This is what's going to be mirrored in your every moment. So when there is a shift from the conscious belief that you're not worthy, just to make a very short form of it, to the fact that you are worthy, or maybe I'm more worthy than I thought, or maybe I can create my own reality, is what people like to call it. The world is certainly not real, but if you believe it's real, then you can definitely believe that you're creating your own reality. Then this places, let's say you, meaning anyone, in the position of being open to the idea that maybe I'm more than I thought I was. Now, ultimately, what happens for someone that goes the whole route, as I did, and achieves everything the world says is success, as I did, is that they find that success does not bring them to what I call joy. Happiness is the roller coaster I've mentioned many times between sorrow and happiness. It doesn't bring them a lasting joy. It brings them intermittent joy, which they call happiness, and then sorrow, and then joy, and then sorrow, very often at the same time. And this is the breaking point then where that, call it an individual, it's not really, but call it an individual, then considers the possibility that maybe I'm more than a human being. Maybe there is something more than me. Maybe all this stuff that I've been hearing for all of my life, or maybe just a few years, that I'm more than just a human, is a possibility. So you see that the receptiveness of the consciousness, despite the fact that it's sleeping or slumbering, is awakening because it's become aware of the possibility that I'm more than I thought I was when it felt unworthy over centuries, thousands of years, to now where it feels like it is more worthy. Now it reaches the point where that worthiness doesn't bring it the joy that it was hoping for. And as a result, it's scratching its head and saying, well, gee, I feel like I'm more worthy, but why am I not happy? And that's when the turn inwards is much easier. So it's a way of bringing conscious awareness that's still slumbering, but not fully asleep, to a point where it's easier to turn inward, despite the fact that even at that point, usually there's great misery and frustration over the fact that I've got all this ability, I've got all this education, I have all this positive mental attitude, so-called, and things are still not bringing me joy. They're bringing me stuff and experiences, but I'm still not joyful in an unbroken state. So from that standpoint, to make a long story longer, self-development or improvement has a value. And this is very much what's happening with most of humanity. It's certainly the way that I went from where I was to the turn inward and the eventual freedom. So that's what I wanted to touch on as an extrapolation of talking about self-development. So let's go to the first question.
All right, I'm going to start with a question from Anonymous, which I'm reading from my phone. About 3 years ago, I went to the doctor for an examination and received a diagnosis for a significant condition for which I was given medication. Then the other day, I went for a checkup and the doctor said it is now a severe case and I will have to go in for surgery, but there's no guarantee that it will sort out the condition for more than a few years. I was saddened by this, and my question is, why? Was this in the script, the self-arranged, or did it come from conditioning?
Okay. Well, first of all, let's be very clear that the self does not arrange your predestiny, does not arrange anything. The self simply is, and it's empty until it needs to so-called know something or do something, and then it's right there. It's knows exactly what to do in the moment, but it's basically it's emptiness or nothingness. It's the conditioning that one comes in with that creates the architecture of your life in totality. And this is moment to moment. Which way you turn your head, everything is predestined according to the condition you came in with, until and if you reach the stage where you've had enough and you've decided that you're going to go within and you've chosen to be free. When that decision is made, and it's a sincere decision, and you stick to it and you're vigilant with it, it's not wishy-washy back and forth, which usually is the case in most individuals' lives for some years. But when it is solid, no matter what, choice to be free, then the circumstances of that preconditioned life alter according to what is you could say, the most direct, and I call it pathless path to one's freedom. You're still being influenced by the conditioning, but it's dovetailing specifically and precisely towards your freedom. Now, let me just touch on this pathless path thing, because a lot of people think, well, this doesn't make any sense. If you have a path, it suggests that you're not there now. I'm here, I need to walk this path, and it'll bring me to this place that I want to be. That suggests distance, and distance suggests time and space, and time and space is an illusion. There is no such thing as time and space. And so consequently, the idea of separation is expanded upon by the belief in a so-called path. You are the self now. You've never not been the self. You don't go anywhere to get to be the self. You just simply unveil what's hiding the self that you are. So that doesn't require go anywhere. It doesn't require a path. It just simply means you're letting go of what is inhibiting the awareness of the consciousness of truth, which is the self, the you that you really are. It's a little more than what was asked, but there you go.
The second question is from someone who also wishes to remain anonymous. And this person asks, how does self-inquiry work together with surrender?
Okay. This is an extremely good question, and it's short, but because self-inquiry / surrender, two sides of one coin, is the ultimate direct route. Even route sounds like a path, but direct route to the awareness of the self, the awareness of the God that you are. It's very, very useful to be clear on how these so-called two things occur. I can tell you that I was already across the bridge to freedom before I even knew what self-inquiry was. My choice, and I didn't even know that it was called that at the time, in 1999, when I left basically the world of opulence for the inward search for self-discovery, my choice was surrender. I said I choose freedom no matter what. So surrender is when you basically hand over your life to life. Life is another word for self. And you don't deviate from that. You don't say, well, I'm going to hold back this little bit here, and you, God, consciousness, self, life, you can handle everything else, but this stuff I'll take care of. No, it's everything. And I like to use the example when I was a kid, and I don't know if kids still do this, there was a game we would play where you would stand up straight and very stiff, and somebody stood behind you, and you're supposed to fall backwards, and just before you crash to the ground, they're supposed to catch you by the shoulders. And invariably, a lot of people, of course, they wouldn't catch you. So you'd bend your knees and throw your hands back because you didn't trust that they would catch you. And that's basically what's happening with most surrender. You trust, but not completely. And so you hold some stuff back. Well, surrender, genuine surrender, is 100%, no matter what. And that's right to the death. And when I say death, it could even mean the death of the body. But generally, and usually, it's the real death, which is the death of identity. So that's surrender. And one can use surrender to pursue the awareness of the self without ever going into self-inquiry. Or they can use self-inquiry, which is who is it that this issue is bothering? Me. Who am I? And then multiply that by thousands and thousands of who is this related to whatever subject. So the answer is always me, and then who am I? Which is not looking for an answer. It's shedding light, shining light on who you're not. So you're not looking for an answer. So that's self-inquiry in a nutshell, and I've talked about it many times in previous recordings, but if it's the first time you're exposed to it, that's all it is, just those three things. You can do that without surrender, and that will bring you to the awareness of truth. However, what I would encourage, if it resonates, always, whatever I say is always, if it resonates. Certainly, I don't have any answers for anyone, except I can tell you who you're not, is to combine self-inquiry with surrender. And here's the way. Let's say that you were involved in a situation where there was a lot of anger. I take coffee in a little parkette quite frequently in the mornings, where I have something to eat. I write an article. I feed the sparrows, and I'm surrounded by other people in the same environment. It's a very, very nice way to start the day for an hour and a half or two. And lately, especially since the collapse of the patriarchy is expanding quickly, there's a tremendous amount of anger. You've probably noticed it all over, not just in the media, but in your immediate environment. People are on edge. They're frustrated. They're angry. They're irritable. They're frightened. And so this anger very often manifests in a very tangible way. And in this little area that I go to, there are a couple of people that walk around shouting, very often shouting at no one. They're just shouting, and they have, they look like they've lost their minds, but they've snapped. And this is not an uncommon scenario anywhere in the world. So now let's say that you or anyone is sitting at a table listening to this, and you're not saying anything. Maybe you're afraid of saying anything, or you'd like to, but you don't. But inside you're boiling, and you're really angry, and you'd like to call the police, or you'd like to tell them to shut up, or whatever. There's anger and there's judgment happening inside, and it's messing up your moment of silence and peace. Let's say that that's a possible scenario. So what you would do in self-inquiry is you would say, who is it that's judging this individual and is angry at this individual? That's the question. Who is it? And the answer always, there's never another answer. The answer always is me. And then the next statement is, who am I? And as I said, we're not looking for an answer. We're simply shining or allowing light to be shone on who you're not, which is me. And then you can follow that with, thy will be done, which is one way of saying I surrender to the self. That's using surrender with self-inquiry. You can say it's more powerful. It's whatever you feel. I'm simply encouraging you to do both, because it literally takes everything out of your hands. There's no control anyway, but most people feel that they have control. So it literally is validating or verifying that you have totally given up any idea of trying to orchestrate your own life. You've handed it all over. So that's how I would use and encourage anyone who's resonates with self-inquiry surrender, if you do, to use both of them at the same time. But it isn't necessary.
There's no control anyway.
None.
Something to write across your bathroom mirror.
Yeah, or forehead.
Yeah. This next question is from Anna Lee, and she writes, I'm on a non-dual path, and A Course in Miracles has been one of the teachings I've been exploring. I have also been hanging out with someone for 4 years who woke up from the dream probably 7 years ago, like yourself. It's been really helpful seeing someone in my daily life who is aligned, apart from the little whispers, which are quick to dissolve, like you mentioned. The two of us don't so far resonate with the phenomenon of the self starting this whole dream of separation business. In A Course in Miracles and other teachings, the seeming separation was initiated by ego, which is fear of that which is not God. The ego cannot mix with the self, being God, being love, being our absolute being. They are mutually exclusive. I'm finding it really challenging understanding how the self could have anything to do with setting this whole dream thing up. You would be aware, having been a student and teacher of ACIM, Course in Miracles, that the teachings say that for God to have created the ego dream and all its horrors would have had to have been an insane God, an insane self. The ego is totally fearful and therefore not thinking sanely. Can you explain?
This is definitely a question mark that many people have, and not just Course in Miracles students. And let me just touch on Course in Miracles, which is a exquisitely beautiful teaching, supposedly channeled through a psychologist, atheist psychologist, and Jewish woman at Columbia University called Helen Schuckman, and channeled through her from supposedly Jesus Christ. And I'm using supposed because this may not be something that you accept. I'm not saying it's correct or not correct. I'm merely saying this is how it supposedly came to be. It took about 7 years for this dictation basically to occur, and 3 books came out of it. You could say that it's a reinterpretation of what's written in the Bible, which has been translated over and over again, reinterpreted through different languages, and appears in many different formats today, basically tainted. And whether it's true or not is another question that you may have. I'm not saying that it is or that it isn't. It's simply filled with a lot of beauty, both of the Gospels and the Course in Miracles. However, And this happened with me about 15, 16, 17 years ago. I read a passage for about the 10th time. I think I've touched on this before. I won't, I have it somewhere, but I won't look it up. It basically said, forget this course, forget this world, forget everything, and fall into the open arms of your loving, I'll call it Father, Mother, God. What it was basically saying is, let go of all knowledge. Be empty. That's what it said. I closed the book, which I'd been studying diligently for 10 years and teaching for most of those years. And I never opened a spiritual book since, and I haven't. I went direct. And of course, the I is no longer there. There is only the self speaking to you right now. It appears to be through someone called John McIntosh, but that person is gone. There is only the self. This is not magical. It's not special. It's the simple truth. That's who you are too. So as beautiful as the course is, as beautiful as many beautiful courses are in various belief systems, all of them ultimately have to go. You have to let go of all of it and be completely empty, because what is true is always true, but the way that it comes to you in each moment is unique in that moment, not if you filter it through the consciousness of some belief systems, which is all learning, all knowledge. That doesn't mean to say that you forget the name that you're using, or you forget how to speak the language or languages you're speaking, or you forget the way to the grocery store. No, but these things literally, they come up in the moment. They're not there until you require them in the moment. So that's a little bit about all learning and courses and so on. But to get to the question, the self, it's suggested that the self, and it sounds like I'm saying this perhaps, which is why the question came up, that the self created the universe. Well, we have to take a step back, first of all, and really, really emphasize the fact that there is nothing but the self. So there can't be something other than the self that so-called creates anything, because there is nothing but the self. So somehow, whatever seems to be, call it the universe, world, your body, somehow has to have something to do with the self. Not with as a partner, but with as the self in some way. So it's associated with the self because there is nothing but the self. The self is also called consciousness, and very often it's referred to as the screen of consciousness, like a movie screen, except that it's holographic, and you could say that it's like a sphere. It's 360 degrees in a sphere. I don't know how to say it properly. I'm sure there's a better way to say it. But imagine yourself inside a sphere that has no limits, and you're looking anywhere, up, down, turn around, look behind you, look beneath you, in front of you. It's all a screen. This is the self when it is projecting the universe into being. Remember, this being is an illusion. It's a dream. It's not real. There is a reality to it that is understood once you are totally aware of the self, but that's a subject that can't be explained in words. So what happens is the self wants to know itself. Can't know itself because it's nothing. It has to create a mirror. Well, the screen then becomes the mirror, but the mirror is blank. So in order for something to appear on the mirror, and when I say on, it's really beyond that, because it's like a holographic thing. It has the appearance of dimension. There has to be a way for that to happen. And the concept, the idea, this is what occurred to the self, is separation. There's the mirror and there's me. Well, me is the self, consciousness is the self, the screen is the self, but it's saying there's separation. Otherwise, it can't look at anything. So in looking at the screen with the belief, first of all, the idea, and then the belief in separation, you have the possibility of manifestation. And I've said this many times before, there has to be a from here to there scenario. So there's an observer, a witness, if you like, or a witnessing, and there is something to be witnessed, which is on the screen, which is the universe, the world, you, what's happening, your experience, and what you're thinking. Now, that separation concept then manifests conditioning. The conditioning, as I've said before, is attachments, expectations, and identifications tied to memory and imagination. This comes primarily, it's rooted in the feeling of unworthiness. The unworthiness is, I'm not good enough. And from that's guilt, shame, and remorse. Those are the basic foundations of the concept of separation as it relates to conditioning, attachments, expectations, and identifications. This is like wearing garments. And those garments are what surround the self to what I call the slumbering God self, which is the self that's hidden behind belief systems, which we call conditioning. And from that state of slumber is the dream. And the dream that results is the universe, world, you, your life experience. And everybody's world is completely their own and unique. So it is this slumbering God self, the self wrapped in the veil of conditioning that manifests. It's not creating, because what's created has no beginning or ending. The universe and the world certainly has a beginning and an ending. It manifests from that slumbering God self based on its conditioning, based on its unworthiness, guilt, shame, and remorse, and the projection of the belief in separation. That's how the universe comes into being as a holographic projection. Not real, but nevertheless appearing extremely real and totally real to most people. This explanation would make no sense to someone that totally believes that the universe, world, and their life, their body, their experience is real. That's how it happens. So in this regard, you could say that the power of projection, the projectionist, is the self. But what is projected is the false self, which is the slumbering God self wrapped in this conditioning. That's a fairly long explanation, hopefully not complicated. I like to keep everything clear and simple, but that's how it comes to be. You cannot have anything occur without the self. Now, to the final point, it would be an insane God that creates what's happening in the universe, or certainly, let's say, in our community or what's going on around the world. Absolutely true. The slumbering God self is insane because it believes that it is less than what it is, which is the self, which is pure, which is perfect. So yes, definitely, that is insane. But it's also not real. The slumbering God self is not real. The false self is not real. So it manifested what's not real out of its insanity of believing that it's not the self. It sounds complicated, but it really is very, very simple. And hopefully that helps.
I'm going to pull a conversation from the comments that are live. I think this person's name is Akaet, but forgive me if I've mispronounced your name. Says, I get to the point and I'm confused in this non-dual space. Is there good and evil, or is that dualistic perception? I feel like there's an evil force in the universe. How do I absorb that into non-dualism?
This is just a recent question?
Just now.
Yeah. Just now, okay. Evil's just an idea. And certainly it seems to be validated all over the place. Certainly today, just, turn on the news, any channel, read the newspapers, pretty much through history, but just, right now, turn on the news. I'm not suggesting you do it right now, but if you turned it on right now, you're going to see mostly something that appears negative, and for sure, a lot of it seems so-called evil. Evil, like the word sin, these are words that have just been made up. Let's bring it down to a simpler format, which is light and dark. You cannot have separation without opposition. And the opposition is, in this case, light and dark, male and female, night and day, up and down, name it. Thousands and thousands of probably infinite numbers of variations of what seems to be. And this idea of we have to get rid of, fill in the blank, evil. We have to get rid of darkness. We need to expand the light. This is the thinking of the false self. You cannot have a universe or a world without the combination of, and it's really not a combination, they're one as light and dark is one entity. You cannot have one without the other. It seems that the world would be better if you didn't, but there would be no such thing as contrast. You would not have the appearance of distance. You wouldn't have the appearance of time without contrast. And the contrast comes about because of the belief in separation. And this creates the opposites. And the opposites include, fundamentally, first of all, darkness and light. So the self, wanting to know itself, wanted to experience, I'm using like mind terms, but wanted to experience every part of itself. Even that sounds finite and it's infinite. It can't do that unless the pendulum swings from 1 to 59. It has to go the full route. To experience the highest highs, you have to experience the lowest lows. So the concept of evil is a misuse of, or a misunderstanding of the value, the importance of darkness in manifestation of the dream of the world universe and your life experience. Darkness is fine when it's blended perfectly, when it's balanced perfectly, as we're moving into right now, a period of neutrality for a couple of thousand years. It's a dream, but there's a dream for a couple of thousand years of, call it the age of light, but it's really the age of balance or neutrality, where light and dark, male and female energies, divine male and divine female energies, are balanced for a couple of thousand years. And we're just moving into that right now, that dream right now. When that happens, the imbalance of an accentuation or an excess of, call it darkness, which then gets the name evil given to it or sin given to it, just made up terms, seems to create situations or scenarios which are disgusting, which are terrible, which are inconceivable. And we have evidence of that everywhere. So without judging the inherent value of darkness and light, it's an understanding that there is an imbalance of darkness and light. So the shift out of the light into the darkness, accentuated, let's say you have 90% darkness and 10% light, that's imbalance. And from that, you get the manifestation of what appears to be evil. And for example, there's a lot of talk right now about pedophilia and child abuse and worse, terrible things, all of which are probably true within the dream and will likely be revealed very soon. And have been going on for a long time. Is this disgusting? Is this what you might call evil? Absolutely it is. But it's also part of what is not happening. It's not real. It's a dream. It's a movie that you've stepped into. It is not real. It's not happening. There are no perpetrators. There are no victims. There are no bad guys. There is only the self cloaked in this illusion of being something it isn't. And in this case, just call it the black hats and the white hats. The black hats, they're bad guys. We need to get rid of them. You can't get rid of anything. Everything is the self. You can only dissolve the illusion that you're not the self. That's the only thing that you need to do to find the balance, the peace. You don't get peace. You don't have peace. You are peace. So to find the awareness of the peace that you are, in the midst of this so-called evil. The world is the way it is. I experience peace, unbroken, always. Joy, unbroken, always. If someone is abusing a child in front of me and I happen to be there, I'm likely going to step in and do something. Will I judge the perpetrator? Absolutely not. Will I love the perpetrator? Absolutely. Will I love the so-called victim? Absolutely. Because I know they're both God. I know they're both the self that believe they're not. And so they're acting in an imbalanced way, which can appear highly evil. But these are just made up things in the mind. I know this is very, very difficult to understand. And if you try to understand it with the mind, I guarantee you, you never will. You can only understand it by eliminating all thought. And that is when you return to the awareness of the self that you are. How do you eliminate thought? Well, you can do it through many, many different mind control concepts, but they all eventually end up dovetail into self-inquiry and surrender. So you can go direct to self-inquiry and surrender. Or you can go through whatever concept you want. But ultimately, the mind dissolves, that is, the misuse of the mind as an operating system, is meaning the servant to the self. It's fine within the dream. But ultimately, it has to lose its usurped position as dictator of your life to the authority of the true you, which is the self. And then what appears to be evil will be understandable. It doesn't mean that you say it's okay. It doesn't mean you don't act if you're there to act. It simply means there's no judgment and there's no loss of peace. I hope that helps. It's very difficult to understand until you're there, but that's why you use self-inquiry if you do.
Wow. John and I were having a conversation. We were chatting before we went live today. Of course, there was the how are yous and how you doings. And we started, when he asked me how I was, I said, well, frankly, I've just been pummeled over the last week. And I feel like I'm taking on processing maybe some of the fear and outrage and confusion that maybe the collective is going through. I don't know why. I just don't feel like it's mine. And the conversation started to go, and John suggested that we bring this to the broadcast so that he could share his comments with all of you. So, John, I just put it on the table.
Yeah. I'm sure that right now, many of you, perhaps most of you, are going through stuff. And that stuff might be far more extreme than the stuff you've gone through since the moment that you came into this incarnation. It might be way beyond what you've been going through. And a lot of it, of course, is just the fear of what might be, not what's actually happening. But there's also what's happening. And so this can feel like, as Anna's saying, being pummeled. You know, I called it rabbit punch, but she says it's beyond that. And sometimes it feels like what's going on is not yours. Well, this can be absolutely true. So let's just take an average in the world of humanity right now scenario of an individual who is sleeping, meaning they are completely unaware of anything that we're talking about. They believe the world is real. Their world is completely prescribed before they're born, but they believe that it isn't. They feel probably that they're imposed upon by powers that are beyond them, but they have certain amounts of control. And very often this will show up in riots, picketing, marching, trying to get bills passed in the government, things of this sort, trying to change governments. You try to exert your control as much as you can. None of this works. Temporarily, it appears to work, but none of it works because you can't change what isn't real. You can only rise above it, and you're not even rising above it. You're simply dissolving the illusion of it as reality. But now let's take another person, so-called person, who has gone through a lot of what some people will call self-work, and they have, let's say, many people use the word healed certain things, certain belief systems, certain tendencies, certain addictions, let's say. And let's say that they used to be very angry and now they're very peaceful. And maybe they meditate every day. Maybe they go to retreats. Maybe they take time away from the internet and telephone, and they shut things down. Maybe they eat a certain way. Maybe they take very good care of their body. There are hundreds and hundreds of ways of so-called working on yourself. You're not really working on yourself because yourself doesn't exist. The body's not real. The mind's not real. The personality's not real. The person is not real. None of it's real. It's a hologram thought into existence through the belief in separation. But it seems like this is what you're doing. And in truth, it really is a way of focusing into one-pointedness, which makes it very easy then to get involved in self-inquiry, where you dissolve all conditioning and you remember who you are. So all of these things, these practices, these activities are extremely good. So now we have a person that has, let's say, we use the word dissolved or removed many tendencies that used to affect or even control their life. All of this was predestined, but nevertheless, there has been a shift from being loaded down with things that disturbed your life, controlled your life, made your life so-called miserable, and now your life is much more clear. Let's put it that way. This is a very common concept, whatever way they say it, for a spiritually oriented person who's been, quote unquote, at it for a while, maybe decades. And so when something comes along that they feel has been resolved, healed, dissolved, it doesn't feel like this is their stuff. This is absolutely true in some cases. And what they're feeling is a flow. You could say you're swimming in a river that has been cleaned up. For years it was like raw sewage. Then it got cleaned up, and the water is very, very pure. There's still some impurities, but not much. And now along comes somebody, threw some garbage in the river upstream, and it's floated down into your life experience. It's like that. And so this is not your stuff. It's in your stuff. Excuse me. It's definitely in your stuff, but it's not your stuff. Well, you could say, as long as you're not completely awake, it's still your stuff. Let's just say that it's not your stuff. So what do you do? So-called, what do you do, quote unquote? This is the mind that always wants to act. And this is also the belief in separation, because it's a belief that you can control things. What you do is you say yes to it. Why do you say yes? Not because you agree with it, but because it is happening. And to resist is to be disturbed, to suffer from this stuff that's not yours. You say yes to it. So you're not agreeing with the stuff. You're simply saying yes to the fact that the stuff is there. And this allows, big capital letters and parentheses, this allows the stuff to flow from there to there through you could say, through your life experience, through your mind, maybe even through your body. It could include something you've consumed, with the least amount of disturbance, without suffering. As long as you don't believe you're a victim, which you definitely don't believe if you have transcended the belief in separation, you're not suffering. You might be in pain, but you're not suffering as long as the belief in victims and separation is gone. You allow it to flow. You're allowing life to live you. It's a part of, an aspect of surrender, to allow what is to just flow, because it's going to flow anyway. And in this way, you are actually, and once again, it looks like there's a you, but that aspect of you which is awake, which is awakening from the slumber of being the slumbering God self that I've said is garmented or veiled in all this conditioning. You are allowing life to live life. You are, you could say, assisting in the full awakening of the God self, slumbering God self, to the self in respect to, let's call it humanity, the full awakening. You're assisting by not trying to get in the way, not trying to assist. Now, there can be exceptions where in the moment, I used the example before where a child, let's say, is being abused, seemingly, and you happen to be there. So this is, let's say, not your stuff, but it's in your face. And if you're there may be a possibility of you interfering in what's going on. In that moment, that's where you're supposed to be, and that's what you're supposed to do. That's part of the generic conditioning, predestiny of what's going on the planet. And you have the opportunity to step in, which might be just for a couple of minutes, and change the direction of the wind slightly. You see this when people have high-powered cars. You know, they put these, what do they call them, spoilers on the back that's supposed to help with speed. It's like that, where you're making a small shift in what's going on, and then you step back. You don't get involved in it. You don't hold on to it. You don't carry resentment or anger. You just let that stuff flow through the stream and past you. And you were involved in that scenario if you were supposed to be involved in that moment, but then you let it go. If you don't let it go, it's like putting on another garment, and it will molest you. If you're angry, if you're judging, this hurts you. And that's what we are shifting out of, is the belief that there's anything but the self. We let everything go. So you let the stuff go. If there's an opportunity to touch into it in the moment, you'll be shown very clearly that you're supposed to be involved in that moment, and then you let it go. So the subject could be spoken about much more elaborately, but let's just leave it at that for now.
Wow, thank you so much. That was helpful. I'm just going to fit in one quick question from Kim. You can probably answer this pretty succinctly. When you finally let go of the illusion, how have you found yourself supported financially?
Yeah, a very simple question. This is probably one of the most important questions that people have. It's a very difficult thing to accept that the miraculous, let's say the miraculous appearance of money, let's put it that way, simply. You know, you need $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month just to survive, let's say, and you're working, let's say, very hard, maybe 2 or 3 jobs to get that, to pay all your bills, and now you have departed completely from the material world, as I did, left everything behind, as I did, and now you don't have your job, but you still have your bills. Maybe you've got a few less because you may have become more austere in your living circumstances, but you still have to feed yourself, clothe yourself, and have accommodation at the very least. Well, to say it'll just show up sounds cavalier, but it's the truth. When you have surrendered to the self, to the God you are, to the truth, to the I am, to consciousness, to life, when you have surrendered and you mean it and you stick to it and you're vigilant with it, this is for real. This is the real thing. This is not just talk. This is not wishy-washy back and forth. You've surrendered. Then what you require in the moment, in each moment, will in some way show up. And very often it'll show up in miraculous ways. I think I used the example that most everybody has experienced if you drive, of looking for a parking space in a very crowded area downtown where there's never any parking space. Somebody pulls out just at the moment that you show up. And there you go. Most people have experienced or seen somebody else experience it. This is exactly how life plays out moment to moment. Something will appear. You are taken care of. You will never be left wanting. I can assure you of that. I know that that is scary. That's like that trust issue of falling backwards and having someone catch you. No. Except for this, I surrender everything. But I have to be sure. Well, then you have to be sure. That's not complete surrender. But if that's let's call it a stepping stone surrender, absolutely fine. Whatever it takes to get you to that full surrender, where you will recognize everything just shows up spontaneously in the moment that's perfect for your situation. The mind may not agree that this is enough, but it's definitely enough. So another subject that could be talked about, for quite some time.
Thank you so much. Well,
Yeah.
I think we've come to the end of our time. I just want to remind people that they can email John if you're watching this in a replay, or if a question comes up that you didn't get to ask live, globalpeaceweb@gmail.com, and send him an email. He loves to get email. And next week, we're going to be on Thursday again at 11 Pacific, or whatever your time zone might be. Same time as today, just Thursday instead of Wednesday.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anne, and thank you, everyone who joined or will join when they look at this later. We appreciate your involvement. Hope that this is of some value, and please feel free to send in your questions to the email there. If you don't want to be on, that's absolutely fine. Anne will take care of it, as she does so well. Okay. Thank you so much, and lots of love.
Bye.
Bye for now.